And we're not live. We are not live. The following conversation was recorded privately for the Head On community. The Head On community meets almost daily for conversations on important issues. It's a community of people from all walks of life, from all sides of the ideological spectrum. If you want to join us, check out that link in the description. We'd love to have you.
All right, so Indigenous. Who is Indigenous? And when I first broached this subject, I would think of the saying, oh, the Jews and the Palestinians are both Indigenous. You know, we both were a subjugated minority group. We lived on this land, and then people came here, displaced us or subjugated us, and now we're attempting to preserve our culture. You know, the Jews maybe in Roman times. You know, since there were this major displacement, and then the Crusaders came and massacred the Jews, and a long series of unfortunate events that displaced most of the Jews from Israel Palestine, and then a not too dissimilar event that happened with the Palestinians after the First World War when the British took over and then started, politically reorganizing the country where they lived in a way that was not so favorable to them, and they're sort of, struggling to preserve their heritage and their ability to live in their homeland, right? So this is the original definition in the 1986, a historical continuity with pre-invasion or pre-colonial societies, distinct from other sectors in society. They form non-dominant sectors of society, and people in the group would identify them as someone in that group, right? And there's anthropologist David Marbury Lewis. There are people that were conquered either by colonialism or imperialism. They've been subjugated or subordinated and incorporated into alien states that treat them as outsiders or inferiors. They maintain their own language and culture that's different from the mainstream culture, and they're conscious of their own separate identities, right? So it seems to me that the way I look at it is there's basically these two people that I would think of as Indigenous, seeking to preserve their culture in this ancestral land. Now, some people tend to make it a competition by saying there is only one group of people that can be indigenous. Now, you have an indigenous flower, you can have an indigenous, variety of grape, and then you can also have indigenous wheat to the same area. No one's saying, well, you can only have one indigenous thing there. But once you start talking about people, they say, well, there's only one group that's ever can be indigenous. Now, when you talk about the New World, let's say in the United States or Australia, or particularly in the U.S. and North and South America, you think of 1492. That's like contact date. That's when everyone who was in North America prior to 1492 are the natives, and the people who came there are the non-natives. It's a pretty clear line. So I think about for example, the Aztecs, the Mexica, the people that the country Mexico is named after. They actually had come from New Mexico, what's now New Mexico, and they had only been there for a few hundred years, and they had come down to the Mexico Valley and conquered all the other peoples. But you would, of course, think that the Mexica, relative to the conquistadors, relative to the Spanish, were the indigenous people, even though it's literally as far as it is from Jerusalem, where I'm sitting, to Istanbul. It's about 1,800 kilometers distance. It's pretty far away, but they're all indigenous because there's this break point. Whereas in the old world, in Europe, Asia, and Africa, it's not so clear where you do the cutoff. Where I live in a place, the city I'm in right now is 5,000 years old. There are cities, Jericho is like another 40 minutes from here, or a half hour, and it's like 11,000 years old. There are peoples that have been living in this land since before we have words to describe what these peoples are. Like we call them the Natufians or the Karelians, but we don't actually know what they call themselves. But we find their archaeology, so we know there were peoples here. And no one's coming to claim that they're those people necessarily, and claiming indigenous. So it becomes difficult to figure out where to put the clock, right? And so the UN, there was a UN General Assembly put together this idea, the resolution for the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in 2007. And they said that they're affirming the importance of the right to self-determination of all peoples. While they're saying, on one hand, we're supporting the right of indigenous peoples to seek self-determination, it's generally talking about a minority group living within a larger country like the US or Canada, and these a small minority struggling to preserve their sort of ancestral heritage. And we're giving them as a collective right to determine their own future. But they're saying there's nothing in the Declaration that negates, for example, Americans or other Canadians from the right to self-determination in Canada or the US. Whereas in the Israel Palestine space, often people will say, well, I want to um, am supporting the indigeneity of the Palestinians. Therefore, the Jews don't have the right to self-determination. There's no right for a state of Israel, or the vice versa. The Jewish people are indigenous. They've been here for since 3,000 years ago, since King David. Therefore, no other group has any right to self-determination of the land. Everyone else can go, bugger off or something. So, can indigenous rights activism turn into nativism? So I would say that, in fact, it can. Nativism is where you're saying the native peoples are better than the immigrants. Where you have a lot of, the Germans believe they were the natives, and the other people, the non-Germans, didn't have the right to be there. And there's lots of right-wing anti-immigrant movements all over the world. So where do you draw the line between I'm supporting indigenous rights, which is usually about a fragile minority, and then supporting a majority population to discriminate against immigrants or people they feel as others? So I'm going to show some memes that I found on the internet through just random people, friends of mine on Facebook and groups that I'm in, and WhatsApp groups. And so this is often the kind of stuff you see. This is one supporting Palestinians as being the indigenous group. So they're saying Palestinians are 80% ancient Hebrew genes, and the Jewish people are 2.5% ancient Hebrew genes, based on a study they're claiming from 2001 of Dr. Ariella Oppenheim at Hebrew University. Now, this study has usually argued why the Jewish people are actually native. This was a study that found that was looking at paternal ancestry, and they found the majority of paternal ancestries from Jews seemed to be Middle Eastern, and and was sort of closer to Mesopotamia and less to other, to Palestinians, but also very similar to other Palestinians and other Syrians and other Arabs in the Levant. And so it doesn't make sense that they're just sort of taking the study and then using that name and then just rewriting the results, basically. And then there was a study from Aaron El Hayek at the Johns Hopkins University. So that study said his theory was that he found that Palestinians were a mix between Italians, Palestinians, or that Jews were, or mixed Ashkenazi Jews in particular, somewhere between Palestinians, Armenians, and Italians. And therefore he theorized that maybe they're a mix between the Romans, the ancient Israelites, and the Khazars, as he assumed that was the representative of the Armenian component there. Later that study got sort of debunked or argued with. I don't know about debunked, but there are, when I do my presentation, I'll go through the analysis with more modern tools than he had about a little over 10 years ago when he was doing his study. This is another one claiming this Johns Hopkins study, therefore that the modern Jews have absolutely no ancient Hebrew DNA, and therefore they're not Semites. This is another one saying the Jews of Israel are Khazarian. They're from Ukraine. They have zero DNA match to the biblical Semites. And Palestinians have 80% DNA match to the biblical Semites. This was from another person on Facebook. The nerve of European Jews calling themselves Semites. That's anti-Semitic and identity theft to the true Semites of the region. And here's one. This is now the other side. These are my Jewish friends and their propaganda. So this is obviously like a Palestinian spokesman from several years ago. Who are the Palestinians? They're half of the Palestinians are Egyptian and the other half are Saudis. And this one's like a variant of that. It says it's not so clear. The screen capture was a little blurry, but it says more than 30 families in the Gaza Strip call themselves Al Masri. I mean, I don't understand how it's 30 families. I would assume if they're all the same last name, I assume it's all one family. But there are like 30,000 people. That represents like 0.01% of Palestinians in the world. There's 0.1%. And it's not a huge amount of people, but there is a family called Al Masri, and they may have had one ancestor, a paternal ancestor, a few hundred years ago who came from Egypt. It's an interesting story, but it doesn't make all Palestinians Egyptian. And then here's one. If they're white and if they're people of color, then you're an anti-Semite. This is showing like Jews with, either tanned or, good lighting. And these are like a little pastier Palestinians and like brighter lights. And then so they're not really from the Middle East, obviously. And then like random Arabs in the 1900s, and Jews started making land. I go to Palestine, right? And then this one is if you're an Arab outside of the Arabian Peninsula, you must be a colonizer. Right, and then this is one where they have like a bunch of like sort of Middle Eastern and one Ethiopian Jew, and then Ahed Tamimi, who's very light-skinned Palestinian, and so it's like we're the white colonizers. It reminds me, my son, who is my wife is Iraqi Jewish, I'm Ashkenazi, so technically he's Ashkenazi Jewish and considered in our culture, but he looks more Middle Eastern, at least a little more Middle Eastern than I do. And so he was saying that kids in his school would like, it's maybe like half Mizrahi, half Ashkenazi, and some of the Mizrahi kids would like pick on the Ashkenazi kids for looking like pale. So it's more of like it's very much a cool thing to look more Middle Eastern. And I feel like that even gets into like the younger kids and into the culture, where it's this fight over trying to be more authentic. It's a quote from Tupac Shakur. Like it's I think the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, the darker the flesh, the deeper the roots. Right. It's also, you find it in African American culture. Like, more, if you're a more dark skinned African American, then you're more like real African, and if you're light skinned, you're like, half white. You're not really like, you don't have the real culture. So I feel like there's a similar, that's sort of the flavor of the of a type of racism, or I guess you'd call it nativism, the attempt to like look more, to be more native, to prove that you have deeper roots in the Middle East. And so maybe I'll take a quick break from this and like show you a little bit about genetic tools. Um, so this is like what's called G35. This is one sample. It's a Levant Iron Age Israelite from Abel Beth Makkah. It's a city that's mentioned in the Bible. There's about 20. There's 25. That's why it's called G25. 25 points. It's like a 25-dimensional graph that they basically take all these sort of differences in human variation and break them down to a number between -1 and 1, like with several decimal points, and basically they use it to create this coordinate that you can then relate all these other human samples through. So it's like a standard format that enables you to compare DNA samples using this some graphing methods. And what's nice about this is there's tools now. You can take this information, and instead of having to be like a Linux master or having to have really good Python coding skills, any sort of like weekend hobbyist or just your average researcher who might not also be a good programmer can now play with massive amounts of data that you can just download publicly from all sorts of studies. So they take studies, they'll do a dig somewhere, they'll find a bunch of skeletons, and then they'll upload them to a public database in this standardized format, so then everyone can see it. So I'll copy this whole chunk of data. This is my data set that I used to make this study that I'm going to do. I focus mainly on the Iron Age, so that's like from about 3,200 years ago to about 2,500 years ago. This is approximately the era of like King David and the kings of Judah and Israel, like the biblical period. So it's a fascinating period for our topic. I also thought there was a lot of bronzes. Let me show you what you can do with this. So I'll choose like a plot. I'm going to look at West Eurasian. So this sort of gives me a background of a whole bunch of samples to start with. And I'm going to post my samples in there. And now I have like a data set. And you can see these are like sort of my Iron Age samples. This is the Iron Age Levant. All this is Bronze Age Levant. This is from about 3,000 plus years ago. And this is from an island in Yemen, Socotra, where you have a very a good example of what the Arabian population looked like before the Levantines started moving there, like ancient Iron Age Iran, Iron Age Italy, and then so now I have another data set here, another set of samples, a whole bunch of Jewish and Palestinian samples, Bedouins, Jews from all over the world. So I can then plot these. And this just gives you a nice picture of the relationships between these populations. And now you can see this is like your Middle Eastern Jews, sort of in between the Iran Iron Age and the Levant Iron Age. These are all your Western Jewish populations: Tunisians, Libyans, Sephardic Jews, Italian Jews, all the Ashkenazi Jews, somewhere between the Levant, Middle East, and sort of ancient Italy, ancient Spain, from the same period. And then in here you have Palestinians, Druze, Bedouins, and so that's that tool. Another cool thing you can do now, if I go back in here, I take my whole data set, and this is an admixture analysis. I can then put that whole data set I created as a source, and now I'm going to here pick a target. Maybe I have some averages. Here's a Palestinian sample. And I'm going to do like an average Palestinian and grab you an Ashkenazi from Ukraine, maybe. And then you can reduce it to 4 populations, and then I'm going to try to run my Palestinian sample, see how long it takes. Right, and you can see it's about, it says 56% Levant Bronze Age, 22% Iran Iron Age, has Sudanese early Christian, and Spain Roman. And now you can do, and it's basically, what it's doing is called the Euclidean distance. It's taking all those little points. Does everyone still see my screen? And it's taking all those little points and finding the closest average in between each one of those points. And it's saying what mix of other samples would make your current sample. So it's trying to find like a complex average by taking my target and saying, if what from my source, if I had to mix at certain portions together, would I get what it would take to make this modern person. So those are basically the two things. The PCA gives you a nice little view, an overview of how people are sort of related in a big view, and then you can see in admixture analysis you can like get a little more fine grain. Okay, so now I have this group. Like what portions does he fit into? At least that within my model that I created. So now I'll go back to my slides, right? So the Jewish people claim descent from the ancient Israelites and Judahites of the Bronze Age. This is like the map from like the Wikipedia on the right of the Kingdom of Israel and the Kingdom of Judah, and then the related Hebrew-speaking peoples that are surrounding them, and then some of the Arabic-speaking peoples a little bit farther, and then to the upper right you have Aramaic-speaking peoples. So here's my sort of graph with the Jewish populations over the ancient populations that I showed you. So these were the two branches, the main Jewish branches, the Ashkenazi, or the European, basically broadly, the European, North African, really, and the Western and the Mizrahi, which was the Eastern branch. And so let's talk about the Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Syrian, North African. All these groups were highly related to each other, as you see, like all the if you start on the right, you have the early Iron Age Philistine samples that they dug up in Ashkelon. There were some interesting samples that look a little bit European. They saw that the Philistines had some of their people had migrated, so there was some truth to that story, but they largely mixed with a lot of local Levantine populations. And then as you get farther, a little more and more European, you get into Tunisian Jews, Sephardi Jews, Italian Jews, and all the way into Ashkenazi Jews, but still somewhere in between Levantine and Middle Eastern and European. I mean, roughly representing the Western expulsion by basically the Jews of the former Roman Empire. After Rome in the year 70 AD destroyed Israel, they evicted a large population of a large portion of the Jewish population, and then again in the 130s with the Bar Kokhba revolt. After they suppressed that, they killed the majority of the people in the country, but they did take a large number of prisoners and slaves and bring them and largely into Italy, as we'll find out as this carries on. So this is the Ashkenazi Jews. Their plot when I do the admixture analysis. So you get around 37% on the Ashkenazi Ukraine, Levant Bronze Age. You get Western Illyrians. Illyrians were people, I guess, where Albania is, sort of the other side of Italy, similar to the Italians of that period. Also, you get some Ukrainian ancestry, not surprisingly, and you get Punic samples, which Punics were a group of people that were originally from Lebanon that then moved into North Africa, and they mixed with the Amazigh, the Berbers, as some of you call them there in Morocco. And it's interesting, there was probably a connection between the Jewish community of Italy and the Jewish community of Carthage, or of Tunisia at that time. It's not too far across Sicily there. And then Russian Jews look pretty much similar. They also about 36% Levant, 39% Levant, and these are averages. These were each one of these is like 20 samples. So I just but I pulled the average. You can pick and they vary if you go into the individual ones. But on average, you get about 39% Levant Bronze Age, and you get either Illyrian or ancient Italian. You get Ukrainian, and then you get the Amazigh. is the smallest group, and then you get the same thing for Lithuania. Ashkenazis of Germany was at Levant Bronze Age at 49%, Iron Age Italy, Punic, and then Kazakhstan. And then the Iron Age Belarus is a picture of me. This is because my great-grandfather was from Belarus. So they were 42% Levant Bronze Age, 29% Iron Age Italian. Eastern Scythians, which is more or less what the original people that were, interestingly, Iranic-speaking people of Ukraine, and then the Amazigh, the Punics, which also had a little bit of Levant ancestry themselves. Sephardic Jews, again, very similar. Punic Amazigh, a little bit of Iranian, Levant Bronze Age, about 36%. Sephardic Jew, an outlier. This one had about 50%. He also has Levant Bronze Age and Levant Iron Age, because I had them in two subcategories, but it's always about 50% from the Levant. A little bit of Punic, because he's in the Sephardic area. You had more of the people from North Africa, and also you get some of this Iron Age Kazakhstan. Italian Jews, close to 50% from the Levant. Iron Age Italy, which makes sense, the Punic populations, and yada yada. North African Jews, you would think they're different, but you see almost the same mix. And the Libyan Jews at 35.5% Levant Bronze Age, and Tunisian Jews about 50%, a little more Punic Amazigh, well, about the same as the Libyan Jews, almost identical. Illyrians is pretty similar to ancient Italy. You don't see the Kazakhstan ancestry. You don't see the Eastern European ancestry in the North African Jews. That seems to be absent. You mainly see Levant and Italian and North African. These Moroccan Jews. Some of them, in the Moroccan Jews, you had some that were even a little more Italian. You had some that were more Punic. There was a variety of differences amongst the Moroccan Jews, but yeah, some of them were high amounts of Levant Bronze Age as well. Syrian Jews were similar. You have a large amount of Iranian, which you'll see this Iranian component come up in the Mizrahi Jews more, being a little closer to the Middle East and not having been migrated to the West. Now we'll talk about the Mizrahi Jews. This is the other main grouping of Jews, somewhere between the ancient Iron Age Iran and the Levant Middle East. That's like this group. So if the first group we were talking about was basically the Ashkenazis, which is the name that for Jews from Germany, but who originally, I guess, started out from somewhere around Italy, obviously, because you see that component, and then the other ones that had been in Spain and then in North Africa as well. And then, as opposed to the Mizrahi Jews, which is like Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, that we're going to talk about. So we have Iraqi and Kurdish Jews, or sometimes they're called Assyrian Jews, have a large amount of like 55% Levant Bronze Age and a large amount of Iranian Iron Age ancestry. Iraqi Jews, Kurdish Jews are pretty similar to each other. Iranian Jews also. This one has a little more. You see a little bit more Iranian ancestry, but between these two, the Levant Iron Age and Bronze Age are at high 40s, 47%. So as you get the really big Jewish communities, they seem to have preserved a lot of this original Levantine ancestry, whereas the really small communities that you see the numbers start to go down, like the Bukharian Jews, you're down to like 31% Levant Bronze Age and more Iranian Iron Age. So they would be forced to intermarry more or try to find wives or convince people to convert at higher rates when you have these small Jewish communities. Georgia and Azerbaijan. Also, this one has about the mountain Jews of Azerbaijan. You have about 33% Levant Bronze Age, and Georgian Jews, it's about 42%. Again, a large Iranian Persian component. The mountain Jews of Chechnya. These groups are in Chechnya and Dagestan. These are in the southern Europe, not to be confused with later Ashkenazi Jews that also showed up there, but are sort of distinct from the mountain Jewish population. So, like, are they the real Jews of Khazaria? I would ask, because so where this whole Khazaria story comes from, there was a book written in the 1100s in Spain, about 1,000 years after the kingdom of Khazaria, which Khazaria existed. It was a kingdom, Turkic kingdom that existed in what's now southern Russia, and it was eventually conquered by the Rus, by the Russians. And according to this book, so this book was written by a rabbi who was in Spain, and it's somewhat of like a treatise. It's like it's a promo why to be Jewish, basically. It goes sort of and uses this story of this king of Khazaria as sort of the background, like in a place a long time ago and a far, far away on the other side of the known world to them, because they were always in Spain, and we're talking about Russia here. there was once this king who interviewed a rabbi, an imam, and a priest. And the book gives one chapter to the imam, one chapter to the priest, and then 8 chapters following that to the rabbi. And obviously it's convincing you why the rabbi's position is the best. And in the end, the king converts to Judaism and they all live happily ever after. So these were the Jews that were living in what would have been Khazaria at the time. These were the native Jews, not the Ashkenazi Jews who came later. And so you do see in this guy, you see a little bit of Kazakhstan and Wusun. This is like almost in Zhejiang, China. This is like the far eastern end. So they have a little bit of this Central Asian ancestry, but unlikely that the whole population of southern Russia converted to Judaism and then forgot about it. Seems not realistic, and you don't see that in the data. Yemenite Jews, also a story. There was a king that actually converted to Judaism in Yemen, a guy named Dunuas, like 100 years before Islam takes off. Dunuas means 2 sideburns. He was the king of Yemen, decided to become Jewish, and there was a big war between him and the king of Aksum, the king of Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians were Christian, and he started persecuting Christians because he was very angry about the Byzantines were persecuting Christians in the Holy Land, so he decided to take revenge and persecute Christians in Yemen. And then later, the king of Persia allied with the local Christians. They killed him and overthrew him and installed a Christian king. And then Yemen became Christian briefly until it later became Muslim. So you do have a large amount of native Yemenite ancestry in the Jewish population, even though it's a relatively large community, but only like a quarter Levantine and about 75% native Yemenite. Ethiopian Jews are interesting. So Ethiopian Jews, I was only able to see that they had some Middle Eastern ancestry when I used Yemenite Jews as sort of I threw that into the mix as the tester. So I would assume that what happened is, as the king of Yemen conquered Ethiopia, he probably sent like a Jewish expeditionary force or something to try to pacify them or to move there or to put some presence. And then after he was overthrown and it was no longer, it became a Christian kingdom, they sort of got stuck there and they just sort of married into a local population. And there you have the Ethiopian Jewish community. The Indian Jewish community, some of them were a little higher amounts of Levant ancestry, and then there was other groups that were predominantly, Indo-Aryans and Dravidians and stuff, but also with a little bit of Levant. Bronze Age, you see. Now the Palestinian people, they claim to be descendants from the ancient Canaanites of the Bronze Age Levant. This is a very similar map, right? So this is like a reconstruction of what's described in the Amarna letters that was found in Amarna in Egypt under King Akhenaten. I think he was doing a discourse between him and these sort of petty kings that were running these various provinces. This was all sort of like a vassal state of Egypt at the time. The head king was this king of Khazar, and there was Abdi Khipa, who was the king of Jerusalem. And they have these stories of there's the sea people start showing up and harassing them. There's also the people called the Habiru, who may be the early Israelites harassing them from the east, and the sea people harassing them from here. And they're asking for support from Egypt and also for them to send food and other supplies. And so that's where at least this map comes from. That's the period when this place was called Canaan. So here's back to my PCA plot. These are the Jewish population. So here's my Palestinian population, and it's right smack in the middle of the 2 Jewish populations, right next to the Levant. Surprise, surprise. And so the Palestinian people, I'm going to talk about Palestinian people in the broad sense: Palestinians, Samaritans, Druze, and Bedouin. You can see the Palestinians are right here. Druze right next to them. There's some Bedouins that are closer to the Palestinians and other Bedouins that are a little closer to Yemenites. I'll get into that. This is your Palestinian Christians, about 50% ancient Levant, and then 50% Levant Bronze Age and about 27, so it's about 70-something%. This is the group with the highest amount of ancient Levant ancestry you're going to find, or they're going to be your Palestinians in general. A little bit higher than you find in most of the Jewish populations. You got 58% Levant Bronze Age. Also, you have Iranian, a little bit of Italian, and you find this Sudanese early Christian, which is interesting. This is one of the Muslim populations, and you have a large amount again in the 70s of the Bronze Age Levant. This Sudanese population comes back. And also Kazakhstan. I'm assuming that this was some kind of like it must be like an earlier period. So you also see it in the Druze that I think it was considered pious to have multiple wives. So if you were a wealthy Palestinian, you could afford multiple wives that were Palestinian. But if you were less wealthy and you wanted to enjoy the piety of having four wives, there was probably something like a mail order bride service for wives from other places, because you don't see you don't see any paternal ancestry coming from these groups. It's just on the female side, and they would probably yeah, in order to get married, you'd have to pay money to the family. So it's a piety and a budget, and so they would have this sort of mail or bride system going on that you see. And again, about 66% Levant Bronze Age, 65%, and then again the Sudanese, the Kazakhstan. These were several different samples, all sort of look the same. Palestinian Muslims. Here you got a little bit of Italians, so you do see maybe some leftover Romans that were here. Again, here Spain, Roman South. This is and there was a famous legion, the Hispania, that gets destroyed fighting the Bar Kokhba revolt, and so perhaps they just stayed there and married local people, and that's what happened to them. Samaritans, about 77. This group has also a very high percentage of ancient Levantine ancestry. They claim to be the descendants of the ancient Israelites. There's no good reason to argue why not. I'll get into a little bit more. You get some other peoples, ancient Egyptians, a little bit of the Yemen ancestry, Iron Age Sea peoples. Druze, again, a high amount of Levant ancestry, 70%, a little bit of Kazakhstan, another Levant, so he's like 80% ancient Levantine ancestry, so that's pretty much he's from here. Another Druze guy who's like 50% ancient Levant, he's got some Iranian and a little bit of European and a little bit of Sudanese as well. The Bedouin population, so you have two groups of Bedouins. One group of Bedouin really seems like they're from here, like since the Bronze Age, but everyone's from here. But they're from here since the Bronze Age, and you have another group that seems to have a large amount of ancestry coming in from Arabia, and so are the Bedouins from Arabia. So this is a group called Bedouin. It's not one sample. This is the whole group of people. So maybe it's more the northern Bedouins, and Bedouin B, which is we would guess we'd call them the Terabin tribe that you're around like the city of Rahat in the Negev. And so they must have come here, that's what we think, at about 700 years ago. There was an immigration of group people. And here I threw in some Saudis, so you could see what we're talking about. So like this guy's like 92% Saudi. And then I found a sample, this was from Gaza, from the Mamluk area about 700 years ago. And so this guy's also a large, mainly Saudi, a little bit of Italian, which is interesting. So apparently, yeah, some Bedouin are really from Arabia, but we're talking it's a small percentage of Palestinians. Whereas your average regular Palestinians, I then went and I put Egyptians in, modern Egyptians, just because people often say Palestinians are half Egyptian and half Italian, and I didn't see anything. So we busted that myth. Palestinians are not half from Arabia or from Egypt in modern times in any sense. And I did find one guy. I found one guy who had a little bit of Saudi. He was like 20%, but he's also 61% ancient, Levant. So Arab populations in the Middle East. So Arabs in general, I think it's important to talk about. This is in 80 BC. This whole chunk here was the kingdom of Nabatea. This was an Arab, basically an Arab state, an Arab country. And it was basically essentially on the border with Judea at the time, the Hasmonean kingdom. And actually, we'll get into a little later, the Judeans actually conquered some of them, and some of these Nabateans ended up becoming Jewish and all of that. But remember that even before Arabia is even in the mix, the earliest Arabic speakers are all really from here. And they, as we see, they end up migrating and bringing with them, they were originally Christianity. They had adopted Christianity, and they bring the Arabic language and the Abrahamic faith. Is there a question? No. And now this is the Arab world today. They've quite expanded from little Nabatea. And now we're going to talk about the DNA of various Arab populations. So here's the Levantines, Syrians, and Jordanians look almost identical to Palestinians, very similar. You've got a large amount of Levant and Bronze Age ancestry, and the Bronze Age samples that I got were both from Israel, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon in the area, not like far east into Syria, but more along the coast basically, and a little near Amman. There were some samples from near Amman. from about a little over 3,500 years ago. And so that's the Levant Bronze Age, a little bit of Iron Age, a Levant Iron Age, and a little bit of Sudanese, and some Kazakhstan, and you have some Iranians in there, mix into the Syrians. Lebanese Muslims, you have a little bit of Persian, mostly Levant Bronze Age, a little bit of Italian, and some Sudanese, and then Lebanese Christians, you have a large amount, 50% Levantine from the Bronze Age, a nice amount of Iranian ancestry. Apparently, when the Persian Empire came over here, people moved in, and a little bit of North African as well. These are people from Arabia, so they look quite different. They're predominantly this sort of pre-immigration of the Levantines into Arabia. That's the majority of their ancestry, and they have a little bit of the Levant Bronze Age population. These Nabateans who brought with them, originally Christianity, and then ultimately, in my opinion, what evolved into Islam and the Arabic, as well as the Arabic language. So into Arabia, you have in Iraq, predominantly Iron Age Iranians, a little bit of Levant, a little bit of Yemen. Emiratis, you have some that's predominantly Yemen, a little bit of Levant, and other Emiratis that have no Levantine ancestry, which is almost entirely Yemenite and Iranian. North African, so this guy is a Libyan, he's mostly Punic, you have ancient Egyptian, a little bit Yemenite, a little bit African, and then modern Egyptians, which actually do have a lot of that Levant Bronze Age. So when the expansion of Islam, so when the Rashiduns came and conquered originally Arabia, they set up two bases, one in Kufa and one in Basra, along the Euphrates River in Iraq, and that was sort of their home base. And then they started to conquer the Levant, and then there was something called the Fitna. They got in like a civil war, and eventually the group that ends up in the Levant was under this ruler, a guy named Muawiyah, which was the Umayyad dynasty. And they were the guys who really end up taking over North Africa. So when you see, as you get into North Africa, you get predominantly this Levantine, and their main base of expansion was in what was called Fustat, which is now Cairo, and then another place called Korian, if I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, in what's now Tunisia. And here, Egyptian Copts, you have some ancient Egyptian, Levant Bronze Age, Sudanese, North African, Punic, Amazigh, and then Sudanese are essentially entirely African, but have adopted the Arabic language. Tunisians, you have predominantly Punic Amazigh, but in a large amount of Levant Bronze Age, Italian. You have Amazigh and the Moroccans, and a little bit of Levant Bronze Age as well. And now we'll talk about a subject called the Lost Tribes of Israel. Like, who might else be related to the Levantines aside from Arabs? Because obviously, if you're looking for lost tribes of Israel and the Arabs, well, they could all be ancient Jews, but then they could all be the Nabateans who lived right next to the Jews. It's hard to tell. But as you get a little farther afield, you can start saying, okay, why does this person look like he's an ancient Levantine? So the lost tribes of Israel, these were the two kingdoms of Israel. You have the kingdom of Judah, the kingdom of Israel, in northern Israel. This was the one that was captured by the Assyrian Empire. In this image here, the Assyrian Empire started to conquer into Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom, and started deporting people. According to Assyrian inscriptions, roughly about 27,000 people were expelled, which is roughly 10-15% of the population of northern Israel, to be realistic. And it doesn't seem like there's strange verses in the Bible that suggest that all of northern Israel was emptied out and moved abroad. And then you have for example, in the Book of Kings and then the Book of Chronicles, which is supposedly written after the Book of Kings, there's still the remnants of northern Israelites there. And the whole section where it discusses has sort of just things that seem out of the right time frame. They use the expression the cities of Samaria, which is a term that you'd use in the Second Temple period when Samaria became a province. Where in the first period, in the Iron Age, in what we call the First Temple period, Samaria was just the name of the capital, and the region would have been called either Israel or Ephraim or Manasseh. But it seems that at some point during the Second Temple period, the Jews and the Samaritans started having discord. They started not getting along with each other. and they started accusing the other ones of not being from there, which is not unusual. I hear their descendants are doing the same thing, 2,500 years later. Nothing new under the sun, as they say. So are they in Kurdistan or Iran? Because what's described in the Bible, they remove these people into first into Kurdistan and later into Iran. So in the Iranian era, you have a little bit of Levant Bronze Age, but predominantly ancient Iranians. In the Kurdish, you don't see modern Kurds having this ancient Levant signature that you're looking for. Huh? Okay, yeah. So you do see it amongst Iranians, but not at a particularly high level. It could also be from when Islam reached Iran. It could be from, Muslims. Not clear. The Pashtuns are often thought of as, these people in Afghanistan, the Taliban. They might have been descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. There's legends about that. So I didn't see it when I just looked the regular test that I had been doing. But when I started adding Jewish populations that were near that area, like Cochin Jews, you could see something where in the Cochin Jew B was like 10% Jewish himself. So this Pashtun sample is maybe 2% ancient Levantine. So, but if there could be some basis to that story, and there were some other ones that had a little bit also. So it's a possibility. I don't know. It could just be chance. The Samaritans, are they descendants of the lost tribes of Israel? I would say absolutely. Like they have an overwhelming amount of ancient Levantine ancestry. According to the legends. No, I'm parking the inside. Sorry about that. Yeah. All right. The Samaritans have a large amount of Levantine ancestry. There is, according to the story that the Jews tell, our tradition is that the Assyrians removed the ancient Israelites and brought Iranians there and Arabs. So you see a little bit of Arab and a little bit of Iranian, but obviously that wasn't the majority of the population, and they just assimilated and adopted whatever. They sacked the capital and probably removed all the population out of the capital. And the descendants of which most likely became the Mizrahi Jews, or at least some of them, and they brought some people into sort of administration from Iran, and ultimately the story is that lions convinced them to join, to keep the religion of Israel. The lions, I assume, means the people, the locals said, you got to keep our religion if you're going to be here. We're going to do something to you. So they started being a Samaritan. Are the British, the Japanese? No, I didn't see any ancient Levantine ancestry in either the British, Japanese, not in the Maori or in the Native Americans, and the Cree, the Chippewa, none of that. I looked at the Igbo. I know a lot of people want the Igbo to have part of the lost tribes of Israel. I didn't see it. I only saw a couple samples. If you could find more, I even looked at, try to look at maybe they're from the Ethiopian Jews, North African Jews. So far, I didn't see it. I didn't see there was the people called the Lemba. I haven't found any published data on the Lemba, or at least like samples in G35. If you can find some, I'll be happy to look at that. Portuguese and Spanish, I didn't really see that. Like I was expecting, there's always this legend, all the Spanish people are going to have Jewish ancestry. I don't really. I looked through. There's a large amount, hundreds of samples of these people, maybe in one or two. In a few places, the island of Minorca, which has a tradition that there was a large Jewish population that was forced to convert to Christianity, and there was a group called the Belmonte that were Jews in a place called Belmonte in Portugal, and so they have Jewish ancestry, obviously, and they were preserving Jewish traditions, and they've since come back to being a group of Jews. They were called crypto Jews. So in Italy, which is an interesting place, I didn't expect to see this, but in Italy, you do see that at least particularly in the south of Italy, you see a lot of Jewish ancestry, Levantine ancestry, and it seems you don't see it in other groups outside of the Arab world or outside of the Jewish world at such high numbers. This guy's 35% Ashkenazi Jew and 24%. He's more Jewish than he is Italian. And this is in southern Italy in Campania. My assumption, why is this the case? People say maybe it was from the Crusades or the Inquisition that also happened in Italy, like it happened in Spain, but it didn't happen. You don't see it in Spain that much. And maybe when they first took all these tribes, the women and children, assimilated and married Romans and just forgot they were Jewish. But my assumption is actually that a large number of the Jews who were brought as slaves from or prisoners from the Jewish-Roman War brought with them a new version of Judaism that ultimately evolves into what we think of as Christianity. And that's why you have in southern Italy a bunch of people who are Christian. And then when they expelled all the Jews, all the descendants of those Jews that had been Christian for hundreds of years by that time, in I think the 8th century, then they just stayed in Italy. So you do have that. Right, and here you got Abruzzo and Calabria, then 24% Italian Jew, a Sephardic Jew, and these guys are, like I said, almost more Jewish than they are Italian. Could Palestinians be part of the lost tribes of Israel? That's an interesting question. I know my friend Sima Sinai. Could the part of the lost tribes of Israel? Right, we're back to Palestinians. Yeah, you have a huge amount of ancient Bronze Age and Iron Age Levant ancestor amongst Palestinians. That is true, and they're also from the Levant. So, are they from Israel? Or are they from Nabatea? So this is a debate between me and Svi. Svi says most of their ancestry would come from the ancient kingdom. I say, there was all these other peoples that are also in the area. I remember I did in my last time I did a presentation for Sulcha, I looked at paternal lines, and I found about 20% of the paternal lines, at least in the YFull database, of the Palestinian, about 100 Palestinian samples seem to match other Jewish samples in the database that had quite a lot of Jewish samples. But there could be other Jews that we just don't have samples that only stayed in Israel, and then we don't have their paternal ancestries. So, I think the answer is somewhere in between. You had the Hasmonean kingdom. So during the Second Temple period, Moab and Edom ended up fleeing into what's now Hebron. So because in the rest of this area, in the expanded Nabateans, they were like a small tribe over there in the Iron Age, and in the classical era, they sort of dominated into a very large country, and pushing some of these other populations, these other Hebrew-speaking populations, into Judea, and it became what was called Idumea at that time. And when the Hasmonean under Joan Hyrcanus expanded, they ended up conquering a lot of these areas, including Gaza and Rafah, which were Arab, which were part of Nabatea, and convinced everyone to become Jewish. There was also a place called Etruria. There were a group called the Eturians up in the Galilee who became Jewish. And so they were basically forcing Judaism on, as ancient religions did, around the entire period. So there's a large number of people in the region who had adopted Judaism, at least for some period of time, and it's not clear how long they held on to it. And obviously, at this period, also Christianity starts, and many of them started moving into being Christian. And as we know, the Nabatean kingdom adopts Christianity. So who are the descendants of the ancient Levantines today? I would say the Jewish, Palestinian, and other Arab peoples, and also the children of Abraham in a broad sense. The descendants of the people of the Levant who were the founders of this series of Abrahamic faiths that started with a forefather called Abraham, at least according to tradition, and their descendants, like the Nabateans, who ended up spreading what was then Arab Christianity and Arabic into Arabia, and then comes back as Islam, and Jews that likely Jewish Christians that move into Italy along with the Jewish population that spread Christianity into Europe from there as sort of the mother of all churches in Italy. And that is essentially my presentation. I can stop sharing and we can go back to speaking. So I thought this was really cool. If anybody, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm glad that I got the opportunity to do this. I was actually thinking of doing a presentation on federalism, and I definitely will go back. Actually, me and Emmanuel are actually starting to work on a combined plan and trying to meet with politicians and figure out how to get stuff that's broadly acceptable to the Israeli public and figure out how to do that. So we're starting to collaborate, but I'm happy to go give a talk on some of my ideas. But Adar approached me to do this talk about genetics and indigeneity. And it was nice. I'd thrown these ideas around for a while, but now I actually got to put it all together into one presentation and have something to talk about. And I think in the end it came out cool. I think it's inspirational, and that's what I think about indigeneity. I mean, if you can view both Israelis and Palestinians as indigenous people trying to preserve their heritage, and they're sort of endangered, and we're trying to support them for doing that, and that works for you, that's great. If it becomes like a nativism, a competition of who's the most native, and you're trying to elbow each other out. I feel like that's the wrong direction. I think the direction of trying to find a story that we all like, the story of the shared peoples of the Levant who bring the Abrahamic faith to the world. I think that's a nicer story. Questions, Adar? Anybody else?
Well, one quick question is, it's kind of funny when talking about the lost. It's one thing that's kind of interesting when talking about the lost tribe is how many people claim to be descendants of them, because I just kind. Sorry, did I interrupt?
Yeah. No. I'm trying to listen.
Okay. Well, like for example, I kind of just got here. I don't know if we talked about, but there used to be this very big movement called British Israelism, which was the idea that British people at Anglos were descended from Hebrew Israelites. You had like the
So
black.
yeah, I checked that theory. That was one of my slides. I did. I didn't see that. I don't think that the modern British people are particularly descendants of the ancient Israelites, but I mean they're strongly devout Christians, many of them, and so that I get it's meaningful, that idea.
I'm
Wanting
not.
to connect.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that I agreed with that belief. I'm just saying that's kind of interesting how a lot of people claim to be descended from them and stuff like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's the Book of Books. Everyone wants to be a part of the Book of Books.
Anyone else?
Yeah, guys, real quick. My computer, like for some reason, my connection's really bad, so everything's freezing.
Mhm.
So maybe Adam and Beata want to hop on and co-host this with Rafi, just because it's coming in and out. Interestingly, Rafi, I heard the entire presentation. Well done, super informative. Probably the most comprehensive DNA analysis ever done, I would say, on Levantine populations. So,
Thank you.
much respect to you. Okay, it looks like I'm back, so I'm happy to host now. But guys, if I seem to drop off, Beata and Adam, just know that my connection is not good, and take the lead. But yeah, open conversation. Whoever wants to chime in, ask questions, share thoughts. Oh, Yehuda, I muted
Is
you.
it Yehuda Schwartz?
Yeah, Yehuda,
Eftov.
let me unmute you real quick so you can.
Oh.
Yep, you should be. Now unmute yourself and you'll be able to speak.
Yeah, I hear you. Did you catch the whole
Okay.
presentation, Yehuda?
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, we could debate where they're from, but somewhere in Mesopotamia. Yeah. I would say yes. I mean, there was an interesting study done. Yeah, there was an interesting study at Hebrew University showing that around the period of the we call it of the Bronze Age, there was a migration from sort of, I would guess, northern Mesopotamia into over a period of time. I mean, I think it's large. I like the ideas of Israel Canol. That it's largely symbolic, but there was I think that there's a city called Urkesh, which was the capital of Mitanni, which was a kingdom in between Assyria and the Hittites, and they had a king whose name was Terach, and eventually they pushed him out, and they ended up moving to a place called likely to Haran, and where they worshipped the god of the moon. Like you have the names like Lavan and Sarah and all these moon related entities, and then you have traditions that seem to come from Mitanni into the playing out into the Hebrew traditions. Especially the outfits. I mean, think of the ancient Egyptians are wearing like skirts and stuff, whereas the priest garb are wearing these long pants and a robe, and the rituals also. They're doing rituals outside, sacrificing animals, sprinkling blood. All of this seems to be very much pointed at northern Mesopotamia. So there's definitely some wave of immigration coming there as this place Mitanni sort of collapses under the Assyrians, between them and the Hittites, and they attract people that have these other traditions, and they started to, so it's definitely part of the overall. I don't know how much you saw, but I definitely I think the idea of, to me, the idea of indigenous is always relative to another event. So I would say the Jews are indigenous relative to the Romans. The Roman, they were people that were settled, and somebody else came and started dominating them. But I also talked about how indigenous could always sometimes be problematic. When you start thinking I'm the indigenous, so I'm the first one ever, and then I start pushing out the other guy saying you're not really indigenous. So it can be problematic. I respect that. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. You're cutting out. Are we hearing? Yula,
I can hear him. I can hear
you
him.
can?
Yeah.
Oh, why do I not
Um,
hear him?
Rafi, maybe leave and come back.
Should leave and come back? Okay.
That could fix it. Yeah. Hopefully.
Are we here?
Yep. Can
Yeah,
you
I
hear
hear you.
Yuda?
Oh, yeah, excellent. I did. Yeah. So I think I'm actually. So you see in maybe in some Samaritans a little bit of ancient Egyptian, but not a ton. You don't see a lot of ancient Egyptian ancestry. I guess you could, if I looked more deep dive onto the Bronze Age samples, you might see a little bit. My opinion, I hold with the opinion sort of Israel Knoll about that largely the Israelites were a group that was living in what's now Jordan and what the Golan Heights, Western Syria, and then maybe a group of them went to Egypt with the big famine that happened in the period of the Ramessean period, and then eventually left. Maybe 50 years later or so. It's expected. So, and they think that maybe it's the Levites and the Kohanim that had this tradition, that they were this is there's a couple other scholars that think this, and they brought this tradition, but it was sort of like in the like the Pilgrims in America have the story of the Mayflower. They came on this boat, and then they met the Indians, and they were eating turkey, and now all the Americans adopted that story. So it was likely amongst a relatively small number of the Israelites went to Egypt, at least for some period of time, and then ended up leaving, and then and brought these traditions with them. So I think there's some truth to that. Sure.
Can you all can you hear me?
Thank
Because
you.
for some reason it was muted. I was unmuting but still muted. Can you guys hear me, Rafi?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rafi. This is actually, I think,
Sure.
my third time I saw your presentation. Good. My question to you: are
Sure.
most Palestinians fallahin?
I mean, I guess that's a cultural question. I don't know. A large portion of them.
Yeah.
That's a good
So
question.
they, I,
I could Google it.
yeah.
I would say it seems to me about half and half. Just
Really?
guessing.
I would say a
Mhm.
lot more than half. And here's the thing: is
Okay.
the reason why I'm asking this is that we did a DNA for me and some other Palestinians. One was from Ramleh, the other one was from
Mhm.
Nazareth, and
Sure.
there was me. There was me, who's actually very Falahi, by the way. My all the way back to my great
Mhm.
great grandparents. I go between Lifta, Bet Hanina,
Mhm.
Kufr Aqab, and Ain Karam. That's
Oh, cool.
I'm all over the place, right? In Jerusalem, all of these
Yeah.
are Jerusalem
Oh,
areas.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Sure.
my DNA results was a lot different from those from Ramla, for example. Ramla is a newer city.
Yeah.
It was a city, actually. I think it's one of the only major cities that came after
Yeah, yeah. It was the capital of Arab
exactly
Palestine. Yeah,
Ramla
yeah, yeah.
Palestine.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but and the person from there had actually 30% DNA from Egypt, and
Interesting.
versus me, who had like 88% Levantine, a little bit of Europe, a little bit of North Africa, and very, very little of Peninsula. And the Nazareth person had a lot of DNA from Syria. So it's,
Okay.
I think that when you're looking at Palestinian DNA, the Fallahi composite is much more tied to Palestinian Palestine itself and ancient people of Palestine. In my
Sure, and then the cities.
Yeah, I want to get my raw data, and maybe I'll send it to you because I have your WhatsApp, by the way.
Then yeah, I'd be interested to see it.
And I just found it that like when I compared it to other people, and especially people from what we call the Medanese, they had a lot of traits. Because if you look at it, and it kind of makes sense because people who came from cities that live in big cities, they tend to be like they left, they were clerical workers or educated and stuff. Where Falahis tend to stay in the same place more. They won't move to other cities. They won't, go to Damascus to work or to Cairo. So I think that it's very important, especially because I think Falahi people, I think, are the dominant people in among the Palestinians. Because even in Jerusalem, like my city in Jerusalem, Beit Hanina, is only 4 kilometers from the old city. Yet it's a Falahi town. We speak Falahi. Our culture's Falahi. Their dress, the way the women used to dress and stuff like that. So even like cities like Abu Dis, Al Azariya, Al Asawiya, these areas are considered Falahi, even though they are now today attached to Jerusalem and considered part of the municipality and the city as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the way I was looking at it, I actually considered Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. They were close enough, so I called it all ancient Levant. And I don't know how what test that you guys took, like 23andMe or something. So they may be looking more at variations in modern populations. And so I think overall, the Palestinians, at least all the samples that I've seen, overwhelmingly seem to have ancestry from the Levant region in general. And then you could try to like narrow down to very more specific regions in later periods in history. And it's very interesting. I'd like to see a comparison of Falahi ancestry, also paternal ancestry, versus people in the city. Do people in the city more likely to have been immigrants from other countries, whereas people, you see that in a lot of places in the world. Have a lot likely to be locals for a longer period. Any other questions? Yeah, if you want to send me, you can send me it if you can get into either like 23andMe format or MyHeritage, or if you can convert it to G25. Then I could put it in the same test that I did all these other samples. Is that it?
I'll ask something. You
Sure.
kind of touched on this, but you said we can't quite know if Palestinians come from ancient Israelite populations. Does that mean we don't have ancient Israelite DNA to be able to?
Yeah, we have like 2 samples they call like the ancient Israelites, and you could try to like see how close they are to those samples. But all of them would be somewhat close because the ancient Israelites themselves sort of matched the Levantines that were here for hundreds of years before. I mean, so when I tried to look at it, I said how many modern Jews had similar paternal ancestries that are both Middle Eastern and match other Palestinians. So so that would be more likely that they were of Jewish or at least like had been Jewish for a longer period of time. But then again, it's not 100% sure, in terms of how many of these people were practicing Judaism, and it's confounded by the reality that the Maccabees ended up spreading Judaism around the wider region, and many people might have been practicing some form of Judaism at some point and waved in and out. Religion and culture are ebb and flow. Not sure how much it's relevant. The question,
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, right? I think DNA. I think DNA is relevant to dispel the myth that Arabs are from, or Palestinians are from Arabia and Jews are from Poland. But once we dispel that, it doesn't hold all too much relevance. Like, we accept that we come from the land. Now we need to find a way to.
Sure, but I think you can appreciate once you're like, okay, we've all accepted that we have a place here. Then you can do the research without it being so touchy, which also
Yeah.
might be interesting,
Although it actually is interesting. It's good to dispel the myth, but even if like we were to discover that, let's say Ashkenazi Jews have no Levantine DNA, right? Let's say that's what the
Right.
DNA would show. That wouldn't
Hmm.
actually that shouldn't change anything in practice, right? Do you lose your
Yeah.
right to live on, right? Like people.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, you don't lose your right
Deserve,
to live in a country just because you don't have this right answer.
exactly.
That's yeah, that's like what the Declaration of Human Rights and
Well, right. Like
Indigenous rights, but
who
on a personal on an interpersonal level, there is some weight in that. There's a feeling like being
correct.
from here gives you sort of more right to have a say here, and
Right. There's right, like a good example, like a Native American does not have
mhm.
more right to live on the land than somebody else who was born in America. They both have equal. They both deserve equal rights on the land that they live in. Right.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't matter. But it is true that like the moment we accept that we all come from here, it feels like building that bridge is so much easier. Like it feels like it isn't. It's an important reality to acknowledge, and it seems like it could be a good basis for building peace. The acknowledgement that we all
Absolutely.
come from this land, we all love this land. Let's find a way to share it. I think it would add a level of complexity on an already very complicated conflict had one population not had like ancient roots on the land. So
It might or may have made
I'm
it more simple.
grateful.
Like
I'm
think about
grateful that we're all from the land. Makes it
yeah.
easier.
If you think about like the Maori versus the Europeans, sometimes it like made it easier for them to have this reconciliation, maybe because it was easier for the Europeans to admit that they weren't from there. Like it was, they weren't in denial. Like we know we're from Europe, we're from the Netherlands, where it's very clear, and you guys were here, and the fact that we were fighting it wasn't cool, and now we should try to respect. Maori culture and elevate it. Whereas here, both sides really believe they're from here and say, so therefore my culture is the dominant culture. It's challenging. It has a potential to heal. It also is part of the source of the conflict, and that's what I
Right.
think it's illuminating. It illuminates that there's a truth behind it. Like it's not like the Jews are just like living in a fantasy or eating movies, as they say in Hebrew, right? Or the Palestinians are just eating movies that they are, really from here. They're like, no, they're from here for thousands of years. That's why they're so diehard about
Wait,
staying
did
here
you
because
say
it's true.
eating movies? Because that's a
Yeah. So I'm saying neither side is eating movies about the story that they're from here. They're not just like making it up, you know. They're
wait, but
not
I
just
think
like living.
is that Hebrew slang that you translated to English?
Yeah. Ochlim
Ochlim,
Sratim and Lo Ochlim
ochlim
Sratim.
sratim. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't make all too much. It doesn't make much sense
Yeah.
when you say it in English. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
So they're
chaim
not
b'seret.
just living
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
fantasy land, as they would say,
Right, right.
that they're really from here. But they're actually there is an element of truth to both of these people. So maybe it is liberating to at least be open about it. Like listen, we really are from here, and that's why we're so diehard about living in this land. We can accept that that's a reality that we'll have to cope with, and then find a way to share the land in a way that honors that connection.
Right, right.
What I find interesting about Rafi's presentation, when I think the first time I heard it was 3 years ago, it might have been 2 or 3 years
Mm,
ago, is that
sure.
you're busting two myths. And let me
Hmm.
tell you the two myths that you're busting. The first one, of course, that you very well presented about the myth of that Palestinians are the descendants of invaders from the 7th century, and you're looking at it from that side. Many Israelis who claim that. But there's a bigger myth that you're busting that I, as a Levantine Arab, hear from the Gulf Arabs all the time. I lived in the Gulf for 3 years, and I discussed with them many times. There's a term that they use for us because they don't like us sometimes. They say terrible things to us. Not all of them, of course. And one of the terms they say to us, I don't know if you speak Arabic, but it's Chatayat Roman. And the term Chatayat Roman literally means Rome's leftover garbage. So basically,
Mhm.
that the Romans pulled out and they left their
Mhm.
garbage, and we're the leftover garbage, basically, that the Romans have.
Mhm.
And they And I'm like, why would you say such a thing? Because the true Arabs are the Arabs of the Gulf, because Arabs started in Yemen and came up the peninsula and eventually brought to this. And it's so funny because I'm like, wow, that's like the most like pro-Zionist narrative I think I've ever heard. And to
Yeah,
top it
this was a
off,
myth. Oh, I remember where this. It's attributed to Muawiyah, who probably didn't say that. I
yes,
remember.
it's
Yeah.
it's but the thing is, you have to understand that this is a myth that's almost like even my father would tell us me the story. Like, yes, we're
Yeah.
all Yemenites and we all in the Arabs came. And like you said, it became like sort of like folklore, where like it wasn't.
Mhm.
It's not even based in history. It's like folklore. And so I remember in your presentation where you might have said this. I don't want to paraphrase or quote you, but you said, I remember you showed evidence of Arabic writing, not necessarily in today's Arabic, but ancient Arabic that was found in
Yeah.
the Negev. And it was and you
Yeah.
said something like it was 1,000 years before Arabic was spoken in Yemen or
Yeah.
in southern part of the peninsula.
It's Ahmed El Jalad. He talks about this. Yeah, yeah. Was it the Bear inscription found in southern Jordan? So that's the region. Like what you think of as Nabatea or the Kedarites. This is the place where you have the oldest Arabic inscriptions. It's more the northwest Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria.
You also mentioned
Exactly.
that
They
there was a
felt a
war.
different.
Yeah, I was saying you also mentioned there was a war that took place between some of the
Oh,
southern
the Battle
tribes
of
of the
Karkar.
peninsula
Yeah, so
and
this is a famous. This is the war where the king of Israel actually allies with the king of the Arabs against the Assyrians to defend the Levant essentially from the Mesopotamian invasion, and they were
but the war that you
successful.
mentioned, I'm not sure if it's this one, but you were saying that the people in the southern part of the peninsula and Yemen were fighting, and that Arabic was not the language that they were speaking to each other. Like
Oh,
both of these.
no. So I was saying the Battle of Karkar, the Arabs were fighting alongside the Israelites against the
Yeah,
Assyrians, and that was, I think, 800 BC. But no, the Yemen, the war between Aksum and Himyar. So Himyar was the Yemenites, and they had a Jewish king, and they didn't speak Arabic. They were persecuting this. There was an Arab minority that had moved there, and then they were Christian, and they were getting picked on by the Jewish Yemenites who spoke Himyar, which was another Semitic language that's somewhat older, you could say, or an earlier out. The Semitic language has sort of come off of the out of Syria from the Euphrates River area, and then spread into the Levant and sort of displaced earlier Afroasiatic languages, and then they spread all the way into Yemen, into Ethiopia, and the different Semitic languages. And Arabic is sort of somewhat splits up from Hebrew. I think 4,500 years ago. They say something like that. There's a cool paper on it that they try to piece apart by the languages using computers. Like how long ago were these one language? And about 3,500 years ago, you had Aramaic and Hebrew were the same language. Like, did Abraham speak Aramaic or Hebrew? Well, they were the same language at the time, and there were some version that was matching both of them.
Guys, I gotta hop off. But obviously, feel free to continue. Rafi, thanks so
Sure.
much.
My
And
pleasure.
we'll be in touch about getting another session going.
Sure.
And see you all in the
Yeah,
next
we'll
few
talk
days.
about federalism. Very
Yeah,
cool.
let's do it.
Yeah, I'll,
see you. Thanks, Rafi. Again, I will message you. I'm trying to get that raw data. If you don't mind, maybe I'll
please do, and feel free to send me questions, or if there's anybody else got any final questions here, anything else you guys want to know?
I have a question.
Sure.
So there's this narrative about the majority of the Palestinian population being recent immigrants in the 19th and 20th century that gained take advantage of economic prosperity brought by Jewish immigration and swamp draining and all that stuff. Is this something that you can? Yeah, maybe you can speak to.
I don't think it's true. No, the British took records of the number of immigrants. So out of like 1.2 million non-Jews that lived here. Maybe 35,000 of them were immigrants, including illegal immigrants that they tried to kick out. So there weren't a large number of Arab immigrants during the British period. And the time before that, the Jews were only here really in small numbers up until like the 30s, and they wouldn't hire most of the Zionists didn't want to hire, which was stupid. And you had some of the Zionists were like, you guys are morons. Like, why don't you have all this labor force here? Why are you trying to like have just this, like, you have a small community of like a few thousand, 10,000, 20,000 Jews, and you're going to make them all like farmers and stuff, and you're trying to build a country. Like, what are you doing? But like, you have all these people who are already farmers. Like, you could be doing other stuff. So yeah, it's nonsense. I mean, people moved around, mostly around Palestine. People moved from being farmers. A lot of them got displaced by the Zionists, who basically, like, wealthy Jews bought a bunch of farmland, and then there was land that was being like rented to local farmers. So they like lost a lot of their ability to make money as farmers. And also, it's the time of history when people started moving to cities all over the world. Like, not everyone wanted to be a farmer anymore. They wanted to go to university and like go to movie theaters and wear suits and stuff and eat at restaurants. So it's like, it was the Industrial Revolution. So a lot of Palestinians started moving into Nablus from the countryside and moving into Jaffa, because like why would you want to live in the middle of nowhere? People want to move to a city where there's life happening, go to cafes.
It was actually the opposite. Many families from Jerusalem actually would go to Cairo to look for opportunity. Like, if you look at, like, for example, many of the Husseini families and things, like Yasser Arafat himself. Yasser Arafat was born in Cairo, and a lot of people say he's Egyptian. But the fact is, his family his father and both mother were both educated, and they went to work in Cairo. So they basically, that's where he was born, but because of that reason. So during that period, it wasn't that people were coming because they said, oh, the land of Palestine is prosperous now under British, but there was actually, I would say probably, I'm not going to say it's official, but there's probably more evidence that Palestinians went to bigger cities to look for opportunities because they were losing the opportunity to work on their land.
Sure. And yeah, there's definitely attractions. A little, Palestinians would have moving out of the countryside, both because of displacement by Zionist farmers and just because of modernization. Like, all of a sudden you could go to, you send your kid to a university and go to like live in a city. It's a big attraction, not just in Palestine, but like all over the world.
But even, like, for example, in the villages, like from the 1910s to the 1920s, there was mass movements of people, not just to other cities, but like, if you look at, for example, the largest community in the West is in Chile, where you have over 500,000 Palestinians that live of Palestinian ancestries. These people, this was from the 1920s. So the migration wasn't into Palestine in the 1920s. There was more migration outside of Palestine because of the famine and the hunger. Yeah, like if you go to Chile, and actually my family, to tell you the truth,
I often thought that was after 48, but
I have a great grandfather's brother who went to New York. And it's interesting because you said the name of the Musli. Let me tell you something. When my great grandfather's brother arrived to New York, my grandfather's brother was born, and he's now called Al Yurki, and his family are now called Yurkis. So he's from New York, and this is how Palestinians take their names. The name Al Masri or Al Halabi could have been a nickname because, for example, like the name Ledawi, it's not a family. It's because these people had some association with Al-Lid. So the family that I'm referring to, they're called the Yurkis, Al-Yurkis. And they're still referred to as Al-Yurkis, and some of them even took it as their legal name in the United States. So this is a name that came because they got news that he had arrived to New York the day that his son was born, and therefore the name has become
absolutely. My last name is Gassel. It's like a Gassel, and it's a town in the Netherlands. My ancestors were probably from Italy when they got expelled there, and then they were living in the Netherlands, and then went to Eastern Europe, and then moved to America. And at one point, people just started taking last names. Like in in Jewish culture, you're just called your name the son of your father, or Falzion ben Ari Leib. Like that's my Jewish name, right? In Arabic culture, also, you're just like something Ibn something, right? Or you could be Abd something.
Yeah, but the thing is
that having last names is a sort of a modern Western thing.
Yeah. Because if you look at the migration, especially in South America, like I think in Brazil, for example, there's more people of Lebanese ancestry in Brazil than there is in Lebanon right now. And if you look at this migration actually took place in the early 1900s. And for example, if anybody here who's a football fan, I'm talking about soccer, not football. But like Club Palestino is one of the soccer teams, and it's called Club Palestino. They were founded in 1929 in Chile, and so the South American community in Palestinian community in South America was very well established in the 1920s before Israel, and like members of my family left Palestine before 1929 for work and opportunity because of famine.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
I wouldn't think Palestine is the biggest attraction at the time. You know, with a few kibbutzim and and various wars going on. Civil war going on between the Jews and the Arabs. I don't know.
and
That's why most of the Jews didn't move to Palestine. Most of the Jews moved to America until they sort of cut that off. So my family went to America because it was like, you can go live in
and if you and you can even see more evidence of this if you go to Michigan, to Dearborn, Michigan, which is the largest Arab city in the United States. I believe largest Arab city outside of the Middle East and maybe Europe because of the Algerians. Dearborn is a huge Michigan area, and guess why they went there? They were there in the 1920s to work for Henry Ford. Henry Ford was very well known to hire them. He liked their work ethics. So a lot of Arabs flocked to Michigan in the 1920s to go work for Henry Ford. And there's museums, and you can see so much stuff over there. They actually have museums dedicated to this stuff there.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. So overall, the answer, I think it's bunk. There was not a huge wave of Palestinians in a way that would have made a big difference. I think Palestinians are in Palestine, and it's a question why the Jews are telling this story. Are they telling it to themselves to justify that they dominated Palestine? Or are they telling this to others so they'll get more sympathy? I don't know. I don't know why, but it's definitely not helpful towards reconciliation.
It's used as political rhetoric. Netanyahu repeats it all the time. It's one of his, it's politically convenient.
It's way older than Netanyahu,
definitely. But it's like let's
raised on that. Yeah,
it goes both ways. Both sides use it to their advantage.
Yeah.
From the other side, all Jews are from Poland. I hear that all the time. So it is what it is.
Yeah. That's what I. The other side, I try to find memes of stuff that people post, and it's just it doesn't help. I try to tell them, like, guys, it's just like a form of racism. I see like friends of mine who are Palestinians or activists, and like, I'm very sympathetic to Palestine, but like, why you have to start talking about how Jews aren't really from Palestine? Like, this is going to help get more sympathy because the Jews are illegal immigrants. It's like jingoism because so. I don't know. It's that's why I think this is a good message to promote to people to learn, at least to learn the facts, and then to stop with stop promoting the vision that you're not really from here, and to accept that both people are from here, and now we're gonna have to figure out how to get along here. That's where we're stuck. No, neither group is really gonna leave, and neither group has any interest in leaving. So. Just if we want to end suffering here, people gotta learn to get along, and it's really not that hard. I find most Palestinians are pretty nice when you get to know them, so we try to encourage.
Thank you, and great presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Our two hosts. One of them is muted, and the other one is maybe away. So.
Mushkila. I think I gotta get going already. It's getting.
Thank you again, Rafi.
Yeah,
we could wrap it up. and
I gotta get my kids to bed. With this time change, everyone's messed up here. Like it's really 9:30. My kids are still up, thinking it's like when it was 8:30. So a little trouble getting adjusted.
Do you have an email, Rafi? If we could send you an email, do you have an email, or you could post?
It's rtgassel@hotmail.com. You can find it on that link to where it was in the group. There's my website, and there's all my contact information there. I could write it in the chat too, if I can find where the chat is.
In the chat.
Yeah.
We're definitely looking forward to another presentation by you, because this, I will leave with one of the most informative, showcasing like the differences and similarities on both sides. Looking forward to another one.
My pleasure. Yeah, and my next thing I'm going to talk about, I think, is federalism. Yeah, a proposal for how to live together in some kind of cooperative political solution to our problems here. I've also been trying to promote along.
That would be pretty much interesting because, like, today we explored a bit about history. We will try to establish some ground rules and ground like observations, and then we can apply
Yeah.
this to the practicality of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Put it into practice. Now that we've accepted that we're both natives, what do we do with that? Right. So until next time, it was a pleasure talking to you guys. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Rafi.
Yalla, thank you. Leila tov.
Bye bye.